And we said this last week, we're kicking off a series, it's called Work Life, and last week we started talking about like what do we do when it comes to our work? Not how do we balance the two, because most of us know like that's not really the case. But how do we like develop a theology of work where we can like move through our lives and work well? And so last week we talked about that a little bit. And we said this last week. We said that most people will spend about 90,000 hours of their life working to some degree, right? You're going to be spending about 90,000 hours working to some degree. Now, what we're going to talk about today, I'll say this out the gate. As soon as we start talking about what we're going to say for the next few minutes, right? Where are those of you in the room, like you're type A and you're fairly like driven, abnormally driven? Anybody in the room? Go ahead, be honest about it. I'm this person. Yeah, you like that? Yeah, that's great. Yeah, so I'm going to say for the first 7 minutes of this talk, you're going to hate what I'm going to say. And I do too. So just know as I'm saying it, I'm like, I don't love this. And then those of you in the room who are maybe not wired that way, but feel pressure around what you do, what we're going to talk about for the next few minutes is you're going to probably hate what we talk about. And then the last group of you, they kind of think about what we're going to be doing. Some of you love work so much that what we're going to talk about today doesn't feel like it makes sense. I was talking to a friend the other night, and he and I are wired very similar in this. It's like I don't have a ton of hobbies. Like I have a few because my therapist told me I needed 1 or 6. But you know, I love to work, and then I love to like on my days off also work in what I'm working on, and then on the time off right before I go to bed, I also love to study what I'm working on. So that's kind of how my brain works. And the way that I look at this is I go like, I really enjoy what I'm doing. But what we're going to talk about today is actually a biblical principle that if you're not a follower of Jesus, I would say still applies to you, but it's going to involve the deep trust in God. And also, I think it's one of the foundational pieces of where we actually spend kind of the energy that we have for working. Now, to get us thinking about this, anybody else like me on this? How many of you like absolutely hate to wait? Does anybody like hate to wait? Are you like this? When it comes to waiting, I think about this all the time. When I go to like a restaurant and you wait, how many of you get a little antsy after 2.5 minutes waiting in a restaurant? Anybody like that? I love that your wife is pointing to you. That's fantastic. Him, yes, right here. Yeah. Me too. Waiting is just not my thing. How many of you like you're next to maybe your significant other and you're watching TV and they're trying to pick something on Netflix and that's the biggest tension you have with them in your relationship? Anybody else find this? Like I'm like, why does it take an hour and a half to figure out that we're watching Persuasion again? You know what I mean? Like why is that a thing? There's a Jane Austen reference for you. Like you look at it and you go like, why does this take so long? I hate to wait. And the reason I hate to wait is this, and you feel the same way about it, is that my time always feels valuable. And what's interesting for most of us is the older that we get, the more valuable our time feels. Like I have kids, and with 3 kids, I look at this and I do the like terrible math. Like my kid, my oldest is 8, he's almost 9. And I think I start doing like how many years at home left does he have? And it just is devastating. You know what I mean? I have this app on my phone and I've got all my kids on it, and it actually has like a countdown clock of how many weeks we have left, just so that I could feel consistently depressed. You know, it's like one of those. No, but I look at this, and the beauty in this is you go, when you know how much time you have left, right? Reggie Joiner said this. You tend to do more with the time that you have now, but it also forces us to go like, my time is valuable, which means that my work time is valuable. Like what I do when it comes to my work, I want it to mean something, and I also want to like do it well. I want to be efficient and effective with that. And so when I'm waiting, it's hard, which means this, that anytime I find myself forced to pause, right? It feels like a loss to me. So I've been reminded of this way, like to stop and pause almost always feels like a loss. How many of you, if you're really honest, you don't have to answer this out loud, but this is fun to think about. How many of you, when you like sit down for like maybe 2 or 3 minutes, and maybe this happened to us the other day. I'll give you an example. The power went out in our house the other day because of like a network thing that went on in our neighborhood. And I remember like the kids were upstairs playing. Emily was working on something in the other room. And I was sitting there on my couch and it was just quiet. And I didn't know what to do with myself. And I was like, I hate this. You know what I'm saying? Like there was something in me, I don't know if this is in you, where when you pause and you're almost forced to stop. It's like, who am I? What am I doing? I have this existential thing that starts here and it just kind of bubbles up and it goes, because most of the time, and many of you are like this, I'm moving. I'm creating, I'm building, I'm reading, I'm studying, I'm on a baseball field, I'm at Chick-fil-A. I'm a lot. 3rd time today, not on Sundays, praise God. Anyway, but I think about this a lot. I'm like, I'm constantly going. And anytime I stop, right, Like stop long enough for me to be paused. It feels like I'm losing time. Like when I go get my hair cut, I don't know if you guys are like this. I go get my hair cut and I'm like, this feels like a waste of time. Why do I have to cut all of my hairs every time? Like, can we speed this up? You know what I mean? Like, why does this take so long? It feels like a loss of productivity. Today what we're gonna do is we're gonna talk about that, but we're gonna talk about it in a way where if you're a follower of Jesus, that loss that you feel isn't just a productivity thing. It is a deeply spiritual part of who you are, right? And so in the Old Testament, you have like two sort of like sections of the Bible, and then it's broken up into all these other sections. And there's a section of the Old Testament that's like history. And it's history primarily of a group of people, and a lot of them, the history, a lot of it's called a group of people called the Israelites. And the Israelites have this fascinating story. If you've never read it, I will say this, if you've never read it and you've only heard people talk about it, one of the best things you could ever do is just go read the first few books of the Bible. It's so beautiful, it's so poetic, it's so powerful. But in these first few books, it talks about the Israelites and their story and what's going on. And what's happening is in the section that we're gonna look at today, you have a group of people who had been given by God these commandments. Now, you know about the 10 Commandments. I don't gotta teach you about that. You know about this. But it's given by God, and so that happens to a generation, and then about a generation after Moses sort of reiterating these 10 Commandments, there's a group of people who hadn't heard them like this, and so he's standing up and he's giving these commandments. And in the midst of this, he talks about one commandment, and it's the one where I wish there were like 9. Do you know what I'm talking about? Like, I'd be great with 9 if we just like, let this one out. You know, there's a little bit of that where I don't love it. But you just don't feel it. And the reason I don't is almost always a faith thing. And the commandment that he reiterates to them, he says it this way. He says, observe the Sabbath, right? Observe the Sabbath day by keeping it sacred or holy as the Lord your God has commanded you. Which again, this is where, this isn't like a nudge suggestion. Like when you can, you should keep the Sabbath. Or when you have a week off, this is a great time to do it. Or on vacation, you should Sabbath. No. For this group of people, the commandment that God gave them is, look, you are to pause, you are to stop, you are to take time from being productive and remember. Just as the Lord commanded you, 6 days you shall labor, do all your work. But the seventh day is a Sabbath to the Lord your God. Now, this is the part that's hard, and this is the part that makes this fairly complex. Is the commandment isn't focused on just you being more productive. It actually is so much more focused on your relationship with God. It's focused on you pausing long enough to go, all of your work fits in a 6-day period. Now, here, can I just tell you where I immediately feel the tension of this? And you probably do too. Everything about hustle culture on Twitter, everything about business bros, like all this kind of stuff, everything that you're gonna read, almost everything is gonna tell you that you should rest. But here's what most of it's gonna tell you. You should rest at your own speed of knowing yourself when to rest. And this is what gets so fascinating about this commandment, is God's going, no. It's not about you deciding when. It is going, spiritually, you're going to create a space for work, or it's been created for you. And you will work and you will produce during that time. And then you'll stop and you'll pause and you'll remember. Which I imagine, I don't know if you're like me, but I like to think about so Moses giving this, just to reiterate to all of you, you missed it last time, we talked about something, just get us all caught up. Here's the Sabbath commandment. And I feel like there's a kid in the back, and I'm the kid who raises our hand and is like, but do you not see how much I have to do? That sounds so great for this guy, because he doesn't work hard anyway. But over here, me, I want to work, I enjoy it. Or this is the way that I'm wired too. I'd hear that commandment, I'd raise my hand and go, that's so much fun. But what I do is I Sabbath by working, because that fills me up, to which at that point you go, shh, stop, I don't know why I just got shushed by God in the Exodus, but that was pretty fun, right? That's what it would be like. As I go, but I'm different. And if you don't hear anything else I say today, ready? This is maybe where we could end it here and just go, you're not different. You're wired ridiculously driven, great. You're wired to not be as driven, but you love your work, great. You're wired to have your work and it's joy and you do it all the time, but it's fun for you, all that's great. You are not different in this way. Your body, your mind, your soul, and your spirit are designed to experience a rhythm of renewal. So he goes on and he says this. He says, on it, you shall not do any work. So just to be really clear, because this is for me, the kid in the back, raising my hand. But what about, no, yeah, just to be clear for you, not any work. Neither you nor your son or your daughter, nor your male or female servant, nor your ox, your donkey, or any of your animals, or any foreigner residing in your towns, so that your male and female servants may rest as you do. This is like almost, it feels like a contract. You ever read a contract and you're like, how many provisions are we gonna make? And it's like, all of them. We're gonna make sure it's ridiculously clear. All the yeah, but what abouts. For those people in leadership, this even gets more fascinating. All us group people hearing this again, all the leaders going, yes, I'm so glad you told them that, but for me, but we'll keep going, right? No, all of you. And not only that, you're gonna model it for your family. You're gonna model it for the people that are following you. You're gonna model it for the community and the town and the city. You are going to be in a rhythm of pause and renewal. And when you read the Bible for real, you read passages like this, and at least for me, I write down things like, well, that feels unrealistic and it feels slightly insensitive. Unrealistic and going, yeah, but you don't know what it takes. You don't know how much I need to make. You don't know what kind of progress we need to make. You don't know what I'm carrying, God. And it feels insensitive to go like this. And also, I have this family that I have responsibilities for, and it not only feels unrealistic, right? It feels insensitive because I'm looking at this going, but what about them? But for me to provide the life that I want to provide, it feels insensitive for us to even go here like, no. Doesn't feel like it should. So in the midst of this, I'll say this, one of the pushbacks that you could give, and I think would be fascinating, this is fun to do, is like, well, that was Old Testament. Didn't Jesus like make all of that sort of null and void? And what's fascinating when it comes to these particular commandments is that Jesus made a way for us to be right with God, and then Jesus takes all of it and he sums it up in a more simplistic way. But this is what's so fascinating about Jesus' teaching, is he didn't do away with this part of it, which is fascinating. In fact, when you read through the New Testament, you read through the story of Jesus, you get the eyewitness accounts of what he did. You find Jesus retreating. And you find, this is a part that nobody talks about, I don't think, enough. You find Jesus retreating in the moments where it feels like he could double down and multiply. You see Jesus do a miracle and then he just disappears. Why are you praying over there by the tree? Why did you remove yourself from your closest follower? This is the moment where you teach them what's up. And Jesus is like, nah, I'm gonna go over here and pray. I'm gonna go ahead and pray. And he removes himself often and retreats often away from the work and production that he's doing. So it's fascinating as you look at these Old Testament principles, specifically this one, is there is this rhythm of this group of people that points to building faith in an extraordinarily practical way that no one wants to apply. Now, the rest of the story gets really interesting because you have this passage where it goes back into the narrative and the story in Exodus. I'm gonna read this to you. Let me put this up here real fast. I want you to see it. Sorry, no, I didn't finish this part. I should do this, right? Deuteronomy talks about, go back one more, I'm sorry. It doubles down again. So don't work on the Sabbath. All right, so we'll go to the next one, right? Here's what it says. The context around this, though, in Exodus is fascinating. Most of you know that the Israelites were slaves for many, 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 many years. And while they were slaves, and this is what's so fascinating, their work ethic and production was actually connected to their survival, right? So you work here, you produce here, and you survive. If you don't, then you likely don't. And so then God frees this group of people out of this sort of dynamic. Most of you know the story, the big old staff, water, they go and they come back. That's a bad day for them and all that happens. But on the other side of this, for the next several years, this group of people is gonna be in the wilderness, desperate for God to do what only God can do. And so just like the Sabbath principle about work, we see this here, right? He says to, Moses says to them, he says, this is what the Lord commands. He says, tomorrow is to be a day of Sabbath, rest, a holy Sabbath to the Lord. And they are dependent on God to provide food. And so God would provide food in the morning and then like this quail sort of thing in the evening, right? So he says this, so bake what you want to bake and boil what you want to boil. He says, so save whatever is left and keep it until morning. And here's where this gets after kind of their heart, is they are fully dependent on God's provision and movement for them to have survival in the wilderness here. And the same marginal principle about creating space for God to provide. What happens next here is God is going to provide these 6 days, and on the 7th, you're going to have to trust me. And what's even more fascinating, and we'll look through this in the text in a second, what's even more fascinating is what God provides when it comes to food. This is just fun when you geek out on the Bible. The first 5 days of that food would expire or be not good to eat the next day. And this is what's so fascinating. But on the 6th day, the food that God would provide would last 2 days. And they would have to trust that what God provided was enough for them for both days. All right, let's go to the next passage of scripture if we can. All right, he goes on in Exodus, he says, so they saved it until morning as Moses commanded. Now it gets kind of nasty for a second. And it did not stink or get maggots in it. Thank you so much for the clarity. That's great. So Moses looks at him and says, look, you've been holding this for 2 days now. He says, now eat it today, right? Because today is a Sabbath to the Lord and you will not find anything on the ground today. He's not providing in that way this day. He's causing you to pause and trust his provision in this way. Then it goes on, he says 6 days, right? 6 days, you're to gather it all up. But on the 7th day, the Sabbath, there's not going to be any. There's not going to be any. And this is sort of the deep question of faith that was happening then and is happening now. In fact, if you were to go through Twitter right now, this would be so much fun for me. I almost did this today. Just pull up with one of the hashtags around business and you look through this about how much people feel like you have to produce and work. And one of the most countercultural things that Christianity teaches is this. You intentionally leave space for God to fill in that space with his provision. That working 6 days is not just about your own strength and power. It's about what God can do with your percentage of slicing off and creating space for it, which is really a question about potential. And this is one of the hardest things that I would say if I could convince every person that's a follower of Jesus is this, that your potential is greater when you follow the way of Jesus in this than it is on your own at 100%. It is. Your potential rises further when you create space for Sabbath than if you worked all 7 days. And everything about my mind, heart, body, literally, I feel upset when I say it. I'm like, no, I don't even know, because I want control and I want power and I want to feel like I'm the captain of whatever destiny I'm a part of. I want to do the one. And all of those things are slightly true. And also, until you say, God, I'm going to give power back to you and trust you with your provision. God, I'm going to give my time back to you and trust you with what you want to do with it. I believe there is more potential in trusting you than doing it all on my own. You will never rise to the fullness of your potential that God made you for. You will be wildly productive and everybody around you may go like this. And you will hit a lid and that lid is you. So it goes on, it says this. In Exodus, it goes on, it says, so nevertheless, some of the people, and I love this would have been me, went out on the 7th day to gather it. I don't know that you're right, Moses. I think he's gonna show up another time. I don't believe that that's gonna be good for me. They show up and they go to gather it again. And they go to wherever it is that came about. And they look around and it's not there. And what happens next is one of these passages, again, a lot of people don't teach this part of it. What happens next is this. Then the Lord says to Moses, he holds Moses accountable. He says, how long are you gonna refuse to keep my commands and my instructions? This isn't like hugaboo God. It's not like, it's gonna be all sweet baby. God's upset. How long are you gonna refuse to keep my commands and my instructions? Bear in mind, the Lord has given you the Sabbath. This is why on the 6th day, he gives you bread for 2 days. He's given you what you need. And the principle around this that's so hard for me and so hard for many people and so hard for many leaders and so hard for people in our culture is this, that you can choose to ignore rest and live from your best effort. You can do that. And a lot of people do. Or you can choose to embrace rest and live from God's best for your life. And that is a faith step. This is not a thing that is gonna make sense to most of your coworkers. This is not a thing that's gonna make sense to most of the people that you know. You will have parents that look at you and go, you should, come on now, It doesn't always make sense to the people around you. And also, the question becomes, do you trust God's provision for your life? The rest of the text says this, and so pointed. It says, so everyone is to stay where they are on the seventh day. No one's to go out. And so here's what they did in a forced almost way. So the people rested on the seventh day. A few years ago, I was, again, I like to work for fun. I work a lot. This is hard for me to apply. All right, so this is like, of all these things we'll talk about today, if there's like a chief offender, I will raise my hand, both of them, and a leg. I struggle with this. I don't know why a leg, that got weird. But like I feel this, right? And we had this big event in my mid-20s, and I was a youth pastor, and we had a couple hundred students coming to this thing. They had friends coming into town. And I don't know if have you ever gotten sick right before something that really mattered? Have you ever done that? Has your body ever just said, good job, now we're done? Do you know what I'm talking about? Like, that was a good effort, and now you're gonna stop, And so I'd been working really, really hard, and I had not stopped. I was living alone, which means for me, like this sounds kind of weird. I had like a mirror, and I had a studio apartment, and it had a mirror, which I assumed just to make the room feel bigger. I don't know. But I would use it like House. Did you guys ever watch House? Do you know what I'm talking about with House? I had a marker, and I would just like write stuff. So the entire, like if you walked in there, it's like psychopath. But anyway, so I was like, I had all this stuff everywhere I worked and I worked and I worked and I worked and I worked. And then literally, it was a day or 2 days before this happened, I got so sick that I went to the hospital. So I thrown up so much, I got so dehydrated, my body was literally just shutting down. So I go to the hospital. I'm in Knoxville, and the doctor's like, I think you're just exhausted. They tested me for all, I think you're, do you work? And they're like, what do you do? And I'm like, I'm a pastor. He goes, no, it's probably not exhaustion. I'm like, look, you don't know what this is, man. Like, come on, dude. Like, come on, bro. I'm kidding. But I did. And my body shut down, and I came back. It was the biggest thing that I had ever done at that point. And, I'm dating Emily at the time. Emily's coming to church. I'm trying to press her too, and all my friends are coming to work. But I was physically incapable of doing what I needed to do. And I assumed, and being the leader of this sort of thing, that it all hinged on me, that if I didn't show up and do all this, and I had so many great people, but like I just couldn't do it. And so I got up, and I was about to speak. So I was speaking, all of these sessions. And you know what's so weird? This is like the weirdest, like beyond natural kind of stuff. I was sick. I was thrown up. So sick. And then it was time to speak. And I had just enough. Now I know what it's like to speak with adrenaline. And it wasn't that. And I'd give the talk. We'd finish it up. About an hour and a half later, my body would be like, good job, stop, And it did this for like the whole weekend. And out of the end of the weekend, I rested, I took a week off, all that kind of stuff. But I thought to myself, I was like, all of this, whatever this stuff is, I have responsibility in, but it's not mine to hold on to like this. And there are times where you can push so hard and not realize how much you're pushing and miss everything around you that's so important. The other night, my daughter, Eleanor, she has these like dress-up dresses. Do you know what I'm talking about? Like Cinderella-y kind of. I didn't know about this until we had her. I was like, oh, you really do dress up in dresses. And how much is that? Anyway, so we did that. And so, and I'll never forget, me and my son, we were just running around the house doing all this kind of stuff. We're cleaning up for something and all this. And the best illustration I can give you around this is we're running everywhere. And she is standing still against the wall, and I didn't even know it. And we're passing her. We're just passing her left and right. And she's standing there, like in her dress, like back up, you know what I'm talking about? Like, leg pop. I don't even know how do they learn that so young? I don't even know how they do that. Like, do you know what I'm talking about? How do you say that? Did I say that right? I don't know why I'm looking at you, Josh. Josh, am I saying that right? Josh, every picture Josh is in, he's like, I don't know. That's the highlight of my day. That's it. And she's just standing there. She's standing there looking at me. And I thought about this. I was like, I moved so fast to clean up our house, which we should clean up and all this thing. that I miss that my daughter is just standing there waiting for my attention. And you're like, man, that's the feels. Yeah. And also, some of you your family's waiting on your attention. Some of you, the dream that God put in your mind and your heart to actually do is waiting on your pause so that you can give it attention. When I hear sometimes you hear things like, I want to hear God, and it's a very complex thing to talk about, and it is. But sometimes I just want to go let's pause, create this space, and in this space, often God will speak. But how often do we create this space for God to just speak? And most of the time, not all the time, but most of the time, the reason that we don't follow the rhythm that God gave us for this, I put in my mind, is that somebody is going to sit in the seat of God in your life. And at least for me, the honest, most vulnerable answer is that I want to be God of my own life. And here's my question for you. Is the reason that you don't pause long enough to listen, to create space for God to move, because at the core of it, you just want control? You want to believe the illusion that it's all up to you, right? The question for you, and this is from us, is that you? Who is the God of your life? Is it you? And for those of you prayed a prayer when you were 7 years old, you've been a follower of Jesus since you were a kid. Somewhere along the way, you go, I think he's trustworthy, but I don't know if he's trustworthy in this. I trust God with everything but providing for my family. I trust God in everything except for taking care of my kids when it comes to our finances. I trust God with everything except helping me climb whatever ladder that I view myself climbing. I trust God with everything that. And this is what the Sabbath principle does. The Sabbath principle continually teaches us that God can be trusted. That you carving out that space, the reason the discipline is so important isn't that you're not working. And it's not even that God can multiply your potential even though he does. It's that it reminds you on a consistent, rhythmic basis that the God of the universe doesn't just care about the whole universe, but he cares about you personally too. I always think about this when it comes to the Exodus story and how God provided them food. He provided enough food for everybody, but everybody picked up some food. And that piece of food that they picked up from was God's provision for that individual human. For the children, for the men and the women, all of these people that he provided individually for these people. So here's what I know about me and most of us, and I get this. I'll hear a sermon like this, and I'll be like, yep, that's so good. I should apply that. And by the time I get to Longhorn, I'm like, man, now what did we talk about again? There's a little bit of that. It was good. What are you talking about? I don't know. He was really hyper today, though. There's a little bit of that, Here's what I'm tell you. I don't want this to just be and then I heard it. What I wish those of you who are followers of Jesus would do is for the next month, apply it like your future potential depended on it. Because it does. That for 1 month, 4 weeks, you carve out, however you're going to carve out time during the week to rest, renew, and remember who God is and what he wants to do for you. And as the thing bubbles up inside of you that goes, but I can't, and I don't know, and it's up to me, and then you see people that, they're going to pass me and all of that stuff, all that stuff, make sure as it bubbles up. I want you with the fullness of your own strength to push that back down and go, I'm going to do it anyway for 1 month. And then here's the thing for you. You get at the end of the month and you go, that was the dumbest thing I've ever done. I can't believe I did that. Great. Here's the thing. Nobody will ever know. You just go work 7 days again, right? I'm not going to know. I think that's unwise, but you could go do that. But I think when you invite God into those spaces and you trust him, I don't think you're going to get to the end of the month and go, I shouldn't have. Because when you follow the way of Jesus, your life doesn't remove pain in that way. But it does make your life significantly better. So put in mind to say this way, that your peace and your potential are ultimately determined by your decision to accept or reject this rhythm or this principle of Sabbath. So here's how we're gonna wrap up our time. I'd love for you to do this. I'd love for you to close your eyes for a second, bow your head. I'm not gonna ask you to confess anything like that, but here's what I'm gonna ask you to do, right? I'm gonna ask you just for a second to do something really practical. If you're a follower of Jesus especially, I'm gonna ask you to pray a prayer internally. And the thing I'm gonna ask you to pray internally is God, help me to trust you with my time, right? That's the simplistic piece of this prayer. Help me to trust you with my time, right? And then I'm gonna go one step further, right? And I don't know how to make this private, so you're gonna either do this. Now you could fake this. I'd probably fake it if I wasn't gonna do it, so I'm gonna let you off the hook. But I'm gonna ask you to pray that prayer. And then I'm gonna ask you to take out your cell phone for a second. I want you to pull out your phone, right? Everybody pull out your phone for a second. You prayed the prayer, I'm gonna ask you to pull out your phone. And most people, not all people, most people have some version of a calendar on your phone, right? So I want you to look at your calendar for a second. Here's what I'm gonna ask you to do. I'm gonna ask you to pull out that calendar, and I want you to look at it, and you've got all the stuff that you're gonna do this week. And I want you to answer the question, what am I gonna cancel? What am I gonna reschedule? Or what am I gonna put on pause so that I could take a full 24-hour Sabbath this week? I already got you running. And you're like, well, I can't cancel with them. I can't. Yeah, let me just tell you, yes, you can. Yes, you can. You can do it. Find 24 hours in your schedule right now to pause. Some of you have kids and you're like, what are we gonna do? I'll tell you how one of the ways that we do Sabbath at our house, super practical way. Every Saturday morning, we go to the exact same restaurant. I know all the waitresses. They know my order. They know my kids' order. We know everything. I invite them all to church. It's just kind of fun. That's what I do. They found out I was a pastor. They also said, really, you work 7 days a week? And so we did all this. And I go and we go the same thing. It is a joy and a pleasure for our family. What's the fun thing you can do as a family or as a couple? We spend way too much money on that bacon stuff that we get. And I'll just tell you, it is not because of the bacon. It is a joyful thing for our family to do to kick off our time, right? How do you do it? Where are you gonna find time to rest and renew? And I want you to practically put it down. Now, I'm gonna ask you something really weird and then we're gonna wrap up our time, ready? You got your phone, everybody still got their phone out, right? What you hold in your hand? Just hold in your hand. So you prayed, God, help me to find the time. Some of you just found the time. That's great. Last prayer I'm gonna ask you to pray with your phone in your hand is this. Now, God, will you bless this time, right? I actually want you to pray. Close your eyes, bow your head. We're gonna do it. God, bless the time that I just found and help me to trust you. Father, we thank you so much for what you're doing. We thank you that some people just took one of the hardest steps that they're gonna take in their faith. Maybe period. This is one of the hardest things they're gonna do. And I ask the most tangible way that you show up. And I ask that you would help them to renew, that you would help them to rest, but more importantly than all of those things, that as they do that and as they pause, that they would feel the tangible sense of your presence in those spaces. I pray that people would dream again as they do that. I pray that people would find peace as they do that. I pray that people would hear your voice as they do that. God, and you would make us who you've called us to be, which is people who trust you and obey, even when it doesn't always make sense. So in Jesus' name we pray. Amen.